Welcome to SHOWstudio. We're talking about New York Fashion Week and we're talking about the Marc Jacobs show, which is always a brilliant, brilliant show, which I think kind of in some way kicks off the whole season and closes New York with a bit of sort of creative energy. I'm going to zoom through introductions because he always starts the show bang on time and I'm conscious we'll be introducing as the first model comes out. I've got an amazing set of panellists with me. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
I'm Jim Michael O'Sullivan. I'm an architect and writer.
And I'm Sonnet Stanfill. I'm a fashion curator at the V&A.
I'm Charlotte Roberts. I'm a stylist and co-founder of Masha magazine.
I'm Masha Mombelli. I'm a freelance stylist.
I'm Nellie Eden. I'm a freelance journalist and I'm co-founder of Babyface.
And we can now watch the show really fast. Which is something quite amazing about Marc Jacobs, is that he always starts his show bang on time, which I think is a slight sort of flexing of muscle to show that, you know, he's so good that you have to get there on time.
I think he once delayed for 3 hours.
Yes, it's like the kind
People
of...
gave him so much
a hard time for that. It was because the shoes didn't arrive or something. The shipment of the shoes didn't come.
Oh my god, imagine backstage when that happens.
I know.
This is like quite suitably epic for him as a runway.
But it's really clever, isn't it? Because there's no set. It's like just using a show to make a set almost. It's at the Park Avenue Armory.
It is quite a contrast to last year and the season where he did this whole Americana thing, which was such an epic kind of showcase. This feels like way less showbiz and far more utilitarian.
Yeah, last time was basically a rave, right?
Yeah.
A controversial rave, but...
The white dreads rave.
Cybergoth.
Yeah.
Cybergoth.
So we've got some great millinery
But it's so
going
weird.
on.
It's
Some
such
amazing
a
millinery.
massive space and actually so few people sitting in it comparing to the space.
But I think it's quite amazing actually, that in some ways, because I think you'd feel quite intimidated almost being in a space that big. I imagine it's really echoey. Oh, this is clever. I love when he does this thing. He makes it public facing. He's done this a few times. So the girls walk on the street and get photographed and then go into the space.
I just feel so sorry for the girls. That is so far to walk.
What do we think of the clothing?
They're very chic. It's such a contrast to the last collection.
Such a contrast.
Look, and this is all
It's quite Tom Brown.
Isn't it? It is really. It's also interesting because it's exactly 2 decades since the grunge collection.
Yeah.
And if you think the last show he did was kind of grungy with the cybergoth, and then this is so, there's like a real primness to it.
It's quite 60s, like the boots and that sort of plush hats. Those swing coats.
So they all have hats, basically.
What were you going to say?
I was going to say that he really embraces that thing of season to season. It's just, it's different. It'll never be a continuity. It'll always be a rip everything up, start again.
And it's always a different decade, I feel like, you know, it really swings around. Like he's so good at that sort of like being a bit like a cultural historian, and he'll dive into a period or a time.
The colours are like really muted.
And then there's all that like sort of hip hop referencing on the jewellery that I've just noticed, which is quite
Sex and the City. Yeah.
But then a lot of that, some of the textures and the fabrics as well are that kind of New York hip hop.
Yeah, exactly.
Dapper.
Like.
Okay, and the cup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Very
there
chic, but kind of worn back.
It's quite LL Cool J.
Yeah.
But there is this interest, I think, at the moment about everything looks really retro. Like I was looking at the pre-collections and it was just brown, 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 brown. So this is kind of in keeping with that.
And are we seeing real fur? I saw some, I think, fur trim before. And what is...
I presume real fur, yes.
Oh, so they're going to sit down at the end, so that all the collecting, all the models there.
I like those boots.
Look at those boots.
Yeah.
It's interesting seeing them on the street because that's the weird thing when you're in a bubble of a fashion show. Sometimes it's easy. You don't think about how the clothes would look if they were out, and it's actually kind of, there's something quite grounding about seeing them just on a runway on the street.
The soundtrack of the horns and
Like he's so much about New York. I guess, you know, the soundscape makes sense, and to be like literally on the New York sidewalk.
It's that imitation of life thing, isn't it, where at the end they'll be sat down and people will come out from the audience and walk in front of the models.
It's like when McQueen did that show, Voss,
Yeah.
you know, where you all had to stare at yourself in the mirror before it turned into... Was that Voss where the box?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. Had a weird crisis of getting that wrong then.
It's a kind of schoolgirl grown up, but with those...
The boots are really amazing. They're like super stacked, aren't they?
Yeah, they look very hard to walk in.
Yeah, they look really heavy.
He does a good stacked boot though.
Yeah.
Well, they just look like really very, very chic New Yorkers.
Yeah.
It does look a lot more commercial than last season and the seasons before.
Well, he's having a difficult...
with
the business is having a difficult time, isn't it? Like there was that quote, Yeah,
made.
I know. So he said, what was it? He was
I'm
like,
more worried
I'm more worried
about
about Marc Jacobs than the
Trump.
presidency.
He's the only business in the red.
Yeah.
Which is like obviously a real indictment. But and also that he's kind of that Marc Jacobs is now part of the main line, and you can see that obviously in this, like lots of this stuff looks kind of.
They're trying to hit all different price points and consumers, aren't they?
And of course, the accessories are foregrounded. You know, every look almost has a bag.
Yeah.
That's. Oh, look at the jewelry.
He kind of goes back on things that he says as well. Like, you don't know if he's kind of bending to the will of the stakeholders, because obviously LVMH have such a huge stakeholder in the brand. Like, you don't know whether he's making these things to kind of meet those price points as targets, or whether that's like a decision that he's made, that he's come to. I think that's quite interesting. I know the way he used to discredit social media, but is now
all over it.
But I think that's kind of his strength, that he's very happy to change his mind about things.
Yeah, to chop and change.
Yeah,
definitely.
I don't think he's very self-conscious.
No.
But again, with the changing, because one of the things I think he said a few days ago was that he was asking people not to take pictures during the show. So I think that's part of the whole minimising that. One thing, it was trying to do a really quiet look at the clothes.
That's so strange. But why wouldn't you want people? This looks like the most Instagram-friendly thing in the world. Like having all the girls sat there.
Also, like all the girls that he talks to now, like I don't know what's her name, Kaya Gerber, and she's the face of his new beauty range. Like they're all Instagram stars.
Yeah.
He's like so talking to that audience, and like whilst maybe the real furs and like the handbags and stuff won't be accessible to those girls, like definitely like his little army jackets and skirts and whatever like will be. So just that in itself seems like a funny and maybe like a bit of a contrived statement to say don't take pictures at the show.
And this is very early 90s New York, when they had all those like guerrilla sort of catwalk shows, walking the street when they'd have a big show inside or something. It is definitely a nod to the Perry Ellis days and pre that. Like X-Girl and...
I think also just getting dressed up thing, like the availability of, 80s, 90s New York, the availability of vintage fashion and things that you could buy, that there was so much stuff there in that scene of dressing up.
Yeah, because like even though the colours are kind of very muted, like the looks are pretty dressy.
But I think the colours are so retro that even though they're muted, they're quite there's like an energy to them, I think.
And there's lots of trousers. I mean, a lot of skirts, but
Bags of
also the
trousers.
Americans always do a really good job with what they call sportswear, those kind of interchangeable mix and match pieces.
Do you see this as a bit of a nod to that? Because I think he does play with that history of American sportswear. Like, when he did the Spa collection, where it looked like Michael Kors, basically, it was all those knitted dresses and what have you. And you look at this and I think of, if they weren't wearing the hat and styled so amazingly, you would think like...
There's a lot in there
Michael
that you
Kors
could, definitely channel.
Well, it's full of really wearable pieces.
But I guess that's a business thing.
Yeah. I do like the hats though. The hats are very cute. He does do a good hat.
It's almost a bit as well, like I think the last few seasons he has been making almost quite, not pompous, but quite grand statements. It's been some quite epic shows and big castings, and this is a bit more like where he might have been 15, 20 years ago.
And like,
He's very serious.
yeah.
Very.
I think because he kind of won't come out and be, he won't be quoted on record about talking about Trump.
Yeah.
He has kind of said that he won't dress Melania.
Yeah.
And so like maybe that's a kind of a statement in this time to like have this stuff out on New York streets now, but actually it's so pared back compared to his last season.
Well, I wonder also, I do think there's this thing in fashion at the moment. We were talking about this morning, we did a panel about Ralph Lauren, so it's kind of the opposite, where he obviously very much will dress Melania.
I guess you would look nice.
Well, we were talking about this thing of like how how designers can be political, and one of the ways seems to be just kind of through optimism or channeling sort of revelry in better times. So actually there's something about the kind of nostalgia of this.
Yeah. A different New York.
Where you think, a different time, different New York, exactly.
It's the models all have cameras, phones.
He's so
Yeah,
serious.
they're starting to put them up now.
He looks
Actually, there must be no
stroppy.
photographers inside, because the photographers are all...
Doesn't he? He looks really
Yeah,
upset.
look at that.
Oh, so all the models are taking pictures. Oh my god, so they all have a phone that they've been given. So that the models are going to take pictures of everyone coming out. That's actually very clever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny.
But it's funny to do a gimmick like that because the collection is quite pared back, so it's
Yeah.
almost like that
It
becomes
needs
the
a
story.
lift.
better that that be the gimmick than the clothes, I guess.
Yeah.
Which last season it felt like that. Like I don't know who those were for.
It's very funny that they all have to walk the runway. Haha, look at them all getting shot. This is kind of amazing.
Some more ready than others.
That's a bit. I love that though. When McQueen did that, you know, just that thing of like having to like stare at yourself and like putting sort of fashion up against a mirror.
Fashion editors show.
Yeah. There's no quick getaway after the
No.
show.
No.
I wonder how Anna Wintour got out. You know, she always runs out.
There's a back door hiding somewhere.
Yeah, probably. Or he sat her right at the end.
Doesn't look like there's a lot of kind of pedestrians watching.
No,
Like, maybe
it's
just the angle.
isn't it up against it looks like it's kind of up against a road.
The backwards
Far side
caps
of
and the matching tracksuits.
It's quite Jackie Brown.
Yeah, it is. Quite like you're saying, like J-Lo and LL Cool J and
The All I Have video.
yeah, like proper 70s sportswear with a twist.
Do you see it as a when you look at designers when they've referenced a historical period, do you ever think of, because often how often designers use archives and what have you, do you ever look at it and you're like, oh god, we have a piece just like that in the
I'm
V&A
thinking of those
archive?
hats. We have definitely hats, and some of those, the kind of glam footwear, the super high heel. There's definitely examples that I can think of.
You can
now.
think of.
Yeah. Go onto our website. You can see.
Yeah,
them
you can
today.
feel the archive. Yeah.
The best thing about this as well is like he's getting all these people to walk back down the runway and they're dressed, they look more dressed up than the models do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the models are getting bored of taking the photos now. They've kind of given up.
Yeah, one lone model at the front still trying.
Yeah, just giving it a go.
It's really amazing.
Well,
to
it's
see
a very
how
beautiful, very
consistent
chic collection.
everything-
No?
Pardon?
Yeah.
It's very beautiful, very chic collection.
And it's
Yeah,
all,
it's
it's very
lovely. Yeah.
consistent. Like there,
Yeah.
it is as a body. It's quite
Yeah.
a cohesive whole.
It has a story, it has beautiful color palette, it's really well told.
It is interesting to look at that palette after the context of the men's shows. You know, Prada, the men's show they just did obviously with the women's pre in it was exactly those palettes. It was like, you know, these browns and these reds, and it just, I don't know what it is about, whether there's some sort of comfort in looking back or this kind of, you know, optimistic nostalgia. It's interesting just how retro everything looks.
Yeah.
at the
I was
moment.
looking at the Martine Rose show again today and those colours and they are like these colours, like greys, like sort of gunmetal greys and burgundy reds and like colours that we're not that used to. And maybe there is something refreshing about them even though they're not the most kind of
Well, it's that thing of
vibrant.
old looking new, you
Yeah.
know. I think that's quite.
They're also very school uniform colours, so they're very familiar in that kind of,
Yeah.
but just used very differently.
But I think you're right, retro feeling is very important kind of trend at the moment.
Yeah, I think it says a lot about the state of the times.
Yeah.
There's like a safety in that, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's comfort and safety and familiarity in when the like whole new world order is just disintegrating.
that model is yawning.
I know. Gary's-
I suppose what he's giving you is something that isn't new, but maybe it's new together. Maybe the palette is new.
Also, it's new to a new audience as
Yeah,
well. That's
yeah.
another thing to remember. It's like people who didn't live through it the first time. It's kind of
But also the elements are supersized, you know, like the shape of the hats. It's reminiscent, but they're exaggerated. And the side, the heel of the boot.
Yeah, they're like the Kangol hats, but stretched out, and like the Addy tracksuits, but kind of flared. These kind
is
of.
that just him and Phoebe Arnold having a chat? Weird. Is that Phoebe?
It's quite nice to see it that way because it's literally, this is how bleak it is.
Yeah.
Show's over, folks.
Yeah.
Move on.
Next season.
But actually, Marc Jacobs' clothes is always super classic. It's just styled often in a kind of like a funky way. But if you really look at clothes, he always does very classic things.
Very classic thing.
You know, little dress, trousers, coats with buttons. It's always about kind of
it's
classic
never
woman.
that radical. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. But I do think also this season particularly they probably pushed that as like pieces because last season was just so about the styling, you know, the hair and all of that kind of conversation. You saw every look as a look rather than as pieces, whereas this is much more, you know, the grey coat and the beautiful trousers and what have you.
And
I do think it's interesting that he's done this also in a climate where everyone is talking about like the purpose of the fashion show and like whether it should be something that's for buyers where you come and you kind of, whether it's a trade show or whether you know it's a marketing exercise or whether it's, you know, something that should be public facing. And I think it's really, this feels like it's about, you know, the spirit of the times in some way in terms of the fashion industry and how that's turning and moving. Like, you know, he's been saying that he doesn't want to do See Now Buy Now and that he thinks it's all about waiting and what have you. So it's interesting, I think, that he's done something that is so about sort of putting a mirror up to the industry, because that's obviously something that's very much on his mind.
I mean, he looked really disgruntled doing his walk.
Yeah, because
Maybe
in the
it's 'cause
past,
of the Grindr thing.
It was the what?
Didn't something happen with Grindr or something like that? Some big orgy story came out and he sort of was like, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm going to delete the app or something.
Any more orgies or any more? That's it for this week, folks.
he did was always before very enthusiastic when he came on.
I find this really fascinating.
Yeah.
It's a real tea thing that's
It's like an anthropological experiment.
It really is, though. But there's... Sorry,
I
go
was going
ahead.
to say, Imitation of Christ did do this. It was about 10 years ago, I think, where the show was model seated and some people coming out, the audience came out along a runway and walked. So there's that kind of,
But now
maybe a
you've
bit of
got
a reference back to that as well.
The thing is that you've got a phone in the equation, so you've got people standing like half a foot away from each other,
Taking
basically
pictures
with
of each
phones.
other.
Yeah.
Like it's just
And then models.
it's like a crazy conversation.
Yeah.
It's like just they're literally sort of like high-fiving with each other's iPhones, like
Yeah.
taking a picture of you,
Everyone's
taking a
taking
picture of me,
pictures of
taking a
each
Each
picture.
It's
other.
just completely-
But that's kind of, it's such
Yeah.
a joke. Like, look how silly it looks when you actually
Yeah.
watch it. You know, it's like literally people taking pictures of each other.
But
then
then
it-
models filming the audience filming the
I
model
wonder
filming
what they're
the
going to
audience.
do with all of the footage that the models capture.
It's fascinating.
That would be so
Interesting
interesting
to
to
see what
see
they
like
do.
how they archive that or whether they use that.
Do you think it's their phones or the company phones?
Oh, it's company phones. And
They're all
they're all the
matching.
same. They're all matching. So they've got like these covers.
Color
on them.
coordinated.
So they
with the
probably
outfits.
did like Marc Jacobs phone cover.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or muted colors.
Is that Gwen Stefani?
They are not in a hurry to go anywhere.
No.
Look at that, they're just hanging out.
But it's like people will do anything for an Instagram moment.
Yeah.
You know. It's interesting to see how this will change the language of the social media that goes out around his show, because you know it's that image of sort of a catwalk look. No matter what the setting is, that picture of a girl walking past you that people take on their phone from the front row is so sort of ubiquitous and recognisable that to see something like this is going to feel quite sort of jarring and strange. Because obviously people do presentations, but there's always the formality of like the fashion presentation is totally kind of disrupted by this. Like it's going to look quite messy, and the girls are on their phones, and
This is, you know, far outlasting the length of the catwalk show.
It's true.
Yeah.
They're lingering, and it's you kind of think this might affect the calendar. I mean, where are they rushing off to?
yeah,
Nowhere.
They're having a great time. But it's interesting. You always think this would work so well as a See Now Buy Now show.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
like this
He will.
kind
He'll
of
do
theatre
it.
and
He'll do it.
you think he will?
Yeah, he said he's not going to do that next season.
Next season he'll do it.
He'll do it.
He might be forced to if like
Yeah.
by
Well,
the
it depends on his financial boss, because it costs a lot of money to do it.
Yeah.
Because
It
you have to
does.
produce the clothes,
It does, it
kind
does.
of thinking what you will actually sell. Because
What are your feelings towards it, Lou?
I think it's an interesting one. I think it really suits some brands and not others. I think it's like perfect for Burberry, perfect for Ralph Lauren. I think, lost it. I think it's not so good. I can't see how it will work for young designers. I think in 10 years everyone will operate like that. But I think at the moment it's going to take sort of time for people to sort of get to grips with that. I don't know, I do think it will slightly hold back design in the short term until people get used to it, because I just don't see how people are going to, really great collections can feel quite wrong when you see them, and then in 6 months time or in a year's time they feel better. And I think if obviously everyone's always focused on selling, but I think if you're so focused on delivering like right now, I just don't see how people are going to, I think those amazing collections that move fashion forward, real landmark collections, it's probably going to stop those kind of things happening. If you think of those amazing McQueen collections or Prada collections, Com collections that have like sort of shifted the pace of fashion for like maybe for years almost, I just don't think you'll get those in the same way if everything is so driven by sort of that immediate want. That's what makes a See Now Buy Now collection work, whereas I don't think that's often what makes great collections work. It's often that it's showing something that you don't know you want until you've seen it. but that doesn't really fit if you're trying to make someone buy it straight away.
No, and I suppose often what sells so well is different from what the fashion industry deem as a good job.
Yeah.
So that would,
Do you think that those two things could sit side by side for years to come, or do you think that ultimately everyone will be forced into the same?
I don't know. I think a lot of it actually depends on what's going to happen also to Fashion Week, because I think at the moment you've got so many different things going on at the same time. You've got like young designers offering a really creative proposition and almost doing a presentation that's a bit more like a sort of art installation, you know, like they're aware that they're not going to sell a lot of the clothes. It's really like as a creative proposition, and then you've got these huge trade shows going on at the same time, and then you've got these huge, almost like through the stream sort of live advertising campaigns going on where someone like Burberry, it's not really about who's there, like it's selling to a consumer and using like the stream and the visual of that, almost like live streaming an advert during the Super Bowl, whatever. So I wonder if Fashion Week will all break up a little bit, and through that breaking up, maybe people will operate with very different systems. I think that might happen. I think there's enough independent designers who really don't want to do it that for the short, I do feel in the long term it will, more and more brands will go that way, I think, though. I just don't see how you could keep going unless you will really sell and label yourself as a kind of, you know, niche independent designer where you're almost working directly with clients. I think consumers would get frustrated at this, at the lag. I don't know, what do you think about it, Charles?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on it. It's a strange one. Like, obviously, when it first, I think with like Vetements, with all those brands, it works. And when they've a lot of people have done a lot of mixing, and the diffusion line is kind of seen as like an unnecessary adage. I think it's interesting what we'll see with Fashion Week and how there might be a division between, like you say, the kind of more art brands, and then the more Burberry, who you know what it is, you know what you're getting.
Because it's always been weird, actually. That's always been the downside of Fashion Week, is that all those labels are kind of pushed together. Like, you go from seeing especially this was the case at London, which actually kind of made it quite amazing, was you would go from seeing like someone who was like a year out of St. Martin's, and the next on the slot it would be like a mega brand that had loads of money. And that's actually that's starting to happen in Paris now, which is really exciting, because Paris for a long time didn't really have a lot of young designers, whereas now it is interesting that you'll go from like a Y project or a Vetements, which is essentially quite a young brand, to like a, you know, Vuitton or something. But then the problem is that you analyse everything in the same way, which actually maybe doesn't, and I think that it prevents good criticism, but it also prevents, you just don't see things for what they are, and the aims of people get ignored. And like, you know, I do think the aims of Marc Jacobs are very, very different to the aims of Ralph Lauren or what have you, and often intention isn't considered enough, I don't think.
But I think that that's the challenge of New York Fashion Week, is that now that there are just a few shows that you really look forward to seeing. I mean, obviously Marc Jacobs is one of them, and it obviously goes in cycles. But you know, it's been a long time since there's been a really great injection of young talent in New York, and so let's hope for the future.
Well, I also think the young talent that are there has built such successful businesses that they very quickly don't feel like young talent. Like, you don't think of Proenza or Alexander Wang as like, I know they're sort of 10 years old, but you don't think of them as kind of an emerging label, whereas somehow
they're like big brands.
Yeah, exactly.
They're
But then Proenza are moving to Paris, which is interesting, and I mean, like Hood Bayer and Eckhaus Lotte and like those brands are exciting. It will be interesting to see what they do with, I guess, the Fashion Week runway presentation thing.
Yeah, presentations as well have opened up a whole new opportunity for young designers, and like you say, they've become kind of art installations or parties, or in some cases kind of like, you know, live nude drawing opportunities or whatever people want to do.
Yeah, like when Molly did the live
drawing. Molly did, and that was like really, it's rare to go to Fashion Week and be thinking about more than the clothes in London, at least, maybe not in New York. And that's kind of quite amazing.
But not a lot of people always go to New York. I've heard a lot of people being like, oh, I'll just do London, Paris, and Milan, or even. I feel like New York is lagging a bit, and also with the power, obviously, of the internet. Why would you fly across the world to see the show? We've just seen it from here.
I also think the scheduling is really silly at the moment, because obviously there's all these conversations about men's and women's being shown together, which I do think a lot of people think is like a modern, innovative solution. But then New York men's was like 2 weeks ago, and New York women's is now, and there was a weird like 10-day gap between them, and I was like, because it's so wasteful and it makes no sense.
It makes no business sense whatsoever.
No sense whatsoever. So I think that's what I mean when I say that. I think a lot of it depends on how Fashion Week is going to move.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
I don't think it's going to. I do think we'll probably get to a point where men's and women's is all combined, even if it's not. Obviously, there are brands that are just men's brands and women's brands, but I think more in terms of the scheduling. I think it is madness that like it's 4 months basically of the year, and it doesn't make sense. I don't think. But I don't know when that'll move to. Like, will it move so everyone is showing around the couture times? I don't know. I'm really interested to see. I think there's never been more change in terms of that, though. The fact that someone like Proenza, obviously following on from Vetements, can be like, oh, actually, we're going to show during couture and blah blah blah. I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of chop and change.
I think it's confusing for the customer as well. Apart from that, I also think you sort of, even if you're not in the industry, you get used to fashion coming at you at a certain rate in a certain way, and I just get asked questions now about kind of obviously which season is it? And you're like, well, it depends on who you're talking about and to who and where.
Yeah,
and
exactly. But I wonder if actually the customer's already got to put, so even if you do like a big collection, it's drip fed into the store anyway. It's not like there are 2 drops. It's not even like there's 4 drops. There's like, the big brands, like the smaller brands, it gets delivered at one time, but the bigger brands, something goes in that month, 3 weeks later, a different part of the collection. So I wonder if the customer is even.
But I think the customer still gets that, they see social media, the next day they see newspaper reports, a few months later they see the magazine, must-haves, and the editorials, and so by the time stuff starts to come in stores, there's that kind of nucleus of what the key things are almost.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So maybe it's that process that needs to change more than what the brands are doing.
I do wonder how magazines, editors have stayed quite coy about it, but I do think the magazines must be very nervous, because it does totally remove the value of the magazine dictating to you, like, this is how you could wear this is how this could fit into your wardrobe, this is what's good, what's not. Like,
I was in Soho today, and obviously it's half term and the Supreme store is reopening, and I didn't realise. And there were probably
I can't believe you're still alive.
Was it
my
possible
God.
to walk through the street?
there was maybe 400 boys aged between
There was more.
11 and up to 30.
11.
Definitely, and they're on half term, and some were there with their mums who are waiting to pay, and they were queuing down Wardour Street and then back down Greek Street.
Oh my God.
All the way. And they're there to buy t-shirt that they don't even know if they'll get their hands on because there's only 20 of them. And they're there to Instagram it. And they're all like peacocking and checking each other out. But where in that conversation is any kind of like media outlet or it's just like it's such an immediate exchange. Like they are the consumer and the influencer and the brand and so like the balance is changing so quickly.
I think fashion has just missed out in some way on that. Like every time we talk about it on these panels all the time, but also any time I speak to like anyone who works in-house at a brand or anyone who's talking about interesting business models, the ones that always is Supreme. People just talk
Every
about
single
Supreme.
time. It's like this
constantly.
cornerstone of like how to do business more dynamically, and like whether you agree with it or not. Like obviously it's super cannibalistic and like kind of frivolous, maybe superficial, but when you walk into Soho, I haven't seen people queue like that for anything. Like in a time where no one wants to wait for anything, these boys are giving 4, 5, 6 hours of their day over to queuing through Soho because it's an event.
But that's what's so interesting, isn't it? I wonder what you all think about this as well. Like this idea that fashion is working on this assumption that people don't want to wait anymore, that people don't associate luxury with waiting. So they're selling stuff so directly and almost like making it so easy for the consumer when it's meant to be a really elevated luxury product. And then Supreme, where it's actually like, and it's expensive in terms of, like it's not super affordable, but it's nowhere near, it's not high fashion, and they're demanding that people wait. And I'm like, when did it get to the point where high fashion made itself too available
like
that it couldn't make those demands?
You see somebody with a Celine handbag now and you might think, oh, it's a gorgeous handbag. Whereas 10 years ago you'd think, wow, were you on a waiting list?
Yeah,
How
exactly.
did you get that? Like when I haven't seen it in that colour, and there's none of that kind of luster or like mystique around product dropped anymore. It's like designer clothes, they're equivocal to high street clothes in terms of their availability, and I suppose like Supreme is that hype effect, and that's why it's constantly referenced, because in a time where nothing is precious, they make t-shirts precious.
And
that's
they've also
remarkable.
taken out the role of, we used to, in the 50s, you would look to the department store buyer and you would look to the fashion editor as your kind of oracle. And now those roles are have faded into the woodwork, literally. And we look to our own taste to determine. There's much more of a kind of self-determination in the way that people shop and get their information.
And you look to your friends as well. I think that's just kind of what's interesting about the Supreme thing. It's like all those kids looking at each other, both in the street outside the store, but also on social media. It's like you almost like it's really interesting at the moment. Like, obviously, like sort of not to get like all sort of boring in politics, but like like Michael Gove, like the anti-expert thing. And I was thinking about that in the context of fashion, and it's kind of a similar thing where you choose your own experts with who you follow on social media, and you take just as much, like you scroll from a post which is Vogue telling you to buy something to one of your friends who might have bought like a new top or something, and you almost treat them both with the same authority because they're coming to you from the same platform.
It's almost more like credence in someone, like it's like almost cult of the personality, because like immediately if you see someone with a Palace jumper and a Supreme hat, you know what kind of person they're going to be. You're buying an identity, whereas I don't know that the brands like say a Celine or Dior, well maybe for the older customer, but for the millennial customer, they're definitely not creating that kind of cult of personality in the same way that Supreme has. So it's an identifier, and people are so keen for that, and it's a very easy way to do. You don't even have to have a personality, or you'd be into skating to do any of those things. Whereas,
it's political, whether they're aware of it or not, like in the same way that having long hair in the 70s was, like you're saying, if you see a young guy wearing a Palace jumper, you can assume a certain amount about their lifestyle, what music they listen to, and like where they hang out. And there's the same for more affordable women's brands like Marc, for example.
Yeah, Marc is a really good example. So I was going to ask if he's getting that right in the context of high fashion. Do you want more to? Are you capable?
We've all like got a frog in our throats.
For high fashion, Comme des Garçons is a brand like this. Because Supreme Formal is actually very simple. Don't sell out, do things very genuinely, do all the collaborations in a very, very genuine way, and don't make many products. It's so simple. But actually, most of fashion brands, they don't understand that clarity.
And like with the Kusama, with his leather goods, like he used to really hit on those collaborations in Murakami or whatever it was, and they were
Steven Sprouse.
But that's Louis Vuitton.
But he actually should have credit, given that it's we're talking about Marc. And is this
Vuitton Supreme?
Vuitton Supreme would not have happened without Marc
Jacobs.
No, 100%. Marc Jacobs introduced
Steven
the
Sprouse
idea of collaboration
totally.
And these high-low collaborations, and I'm sure did the groundwork in convincing a brand like Louis Vuitton to be free with their logo and let people fuck it up and change it round and invite these artists to reinterpret it. And I think Kim Jones has really successfully built on that, with the Christopher Nemeth collaboration, the Chapman brothers and what have you. But that is Marc Jacobs, that is his genius. And
he opened the door. He opened that door, like, and then convinced them to do that. But I don't know, I felt, when I saw this collaboration, I felt a bit weird. I just feel it's a little bit like giving tobacco to 10 years old. Because it's like these people will grow up and they will come to Louis Vuitton. Maybe 10 years later, maybe 5 years later, maybe 15 years later. But it's a little bit very, very calculated move. I felt like on the part of Louis Vuitton, this...
But I think people are more into the Supreme version of it. So like all the kind of like Supreme heads are like, wow, this is amazing. Obviously all the fashion people are, but they'll just get the ones for free. So
they might not.
But it's like Supreme Luxe, isn't it?
Exactly.
Supreme does so many collaborations.
And it's also the kudos of like, have you got the bum bag? Have you got it?
The bum bag.
The fanny pack.
Yeah, I mean, like I look at that and I don't desire any of that.
But maybe you're not a Supreme die-hard fan.
You think it's what?
I love it. I think it's awesome.
Do you? What I mean is like I respect the kind of like creative decision. Like I can't, as a business proposition. Do you know what? It's like when people say Katie Price is an amazing businesswoman. I'm like, yeah, she is. I look at that and I'm like, yeah, Katie Price is, like I just don't want to look like her. Like I don't want to wear that stuff. But
I don't think that is that bad. I think it's a bit
more respectable.
No, but I think if you compare it to Katie Price,
fashion of like grudgingly, it's kind of what everyone says about Vetements. They're like, whether they like it or not, they're like, oh, but it is very clever. It's like that thing, isn't it?
I think it's also think of a few seasons on, how will this look? Because I do get the kind of the surprise and the unexpectedness and the news factor. But I'm also a bit like, oh, okay.
I'd rather have Louis Vuitton. I'd rather have a Supreme t-shirt. I don't care to have like a red satchel with. It's just to me, it's massive fashion victim thing. You know, if you were wearing that down the street,
It'll be like a collector's item. I see it as a luxury version of the Supreme brick.
Yeah.
Like it's like a collector's. But I also think fashion has a very short memory. There have been absolutely terrible collaborations and people just forget about them. Like,
It's a maybe good thing.
Make a list.
Go on.
Lindsay Lohan for Ungaro.
Oh my god, that was amazing though. I love her.
People don't like. I've said that before,
yeah.
like with like students and stuff, like
It's
when I teach, and they think I'm
hilarious.
joking, and I'm like, no,
that happened.
And
There was
then
a purple
Julian
bodycon
McDonald
dress.
Givenchy.
Yes, that is one of my
do
favourites
you know
as
what,
well.
like, I see that in context, and the denim shirt doesn't offend me as much, you know? Like
You
I
can't
could
backtrack now, babes. You've made your point.
no, I'm trying to see it with fresh eyes, and I can't.
But what do we think, just sort of cycling back to Marc, do we think that, because we're talking about how a lot of the themes of sort of contemporary fashion that we've touched on, and we're saying that he kind of innovated these, do we think he's bringing enough of has he got a firm enough grasp of the spirit of the times in this collection?
I don't think so. I think he does, like, he's done that whole thing where he's done like Diana Vreeland, then he's gone like punk 90s Perry Ellis, then like the chop and change obviously is like charming as it can be. Yeah, and the gothic. It's like there isn't a consistency, so there isn't something to grab onto as much. Like the Marc Jacobs sort of most covetable item is probably like the Daisy perfume or something like that, or it's the accessories, and there doesn't seem to be a tangible thing that is a takeaway in the same way that Supreme and Louis Vuitton is.
Or even if you say to someone now who's 16, you know, Celine, and there's like, they have the kind of badges of that brand in their mind they can pull from. Like if you say something, you said make Marc Jacobs to a 16-year-old, they're gonna reach for those that
I
Daisy
think-
perfume. And
Sorry to interrupt. I don't think Marc Jacobs actually has a style because he's a very eclectic designer, and as I mentioned before, he designs very classic things. But he's a genius marketing. At marketing, he's one of the most amazing geniuses of.
And like Rihanna wore a dress to the Grammys the other night. So like, I mean, obviously he still has some cultural
But like,
passion.
would you see if that we didn't know that was Marc Jacobs? Would you be like, that's Marc Jacobs?
I'd say that was Saint Laurent, like
Yeah, I would
2
say
seasons
this.
ago.
I think it's little touches, the shoes.
Yeah.
So
I think I think he's very eclectic, but this is kind of his core thing is this kind of, I think him and Prada kind of in very different ways, when everyone else was, you know, in the 90s moving towards androgyny and all the rest of it, went down this kind of quotation route and sort of referencing and really brought that playfulness, I guess, back. And so that's what I think of is those kind of funny proportions and those colours, which I mean, Prada to me kind of does different things every season, but it always does seem to be the same colours and the same. I'm never surprised by shapes, and I'm never really super surprised by what Marc does. It's always interesting, but I'm not massively shocked by
Well, I
each
think
one.
that you're tapping into also that element of, which is the backbone of his collections, which is back to sportswear. You know, that's where he grew up as a designer. And so you see these, you know, the trousers with that little jumper and the kind of mix and match of a jacket with a skirt that you could take one outfit from an ensemble and put it with another and it would still look okay. That's a very American, very New York thing to do, and he's so good at it. And I think that's his DNA, and the styling, as you say, I think the kind of marketing and the way the models are presented, that might change dramatically. Kind of almost like pendulum swings each season. Like last time we had the gothic look, and here we are in a much more kind of cleaned up, sporty look. But I think it's that DNA of easy dressability.
mix
kind
and
of,
match.
yeah.
But I feel like the consumer doesn't know that. I feel like maybe we as industry like insiders might like know that and are sort of like have taken the time to recognize those patterns, because they're implicit rather than explicit, say Supreme, Louis Vuitton, for example. I don't know that. I think that's potentially what he's missing in terms of like sales, like, to be honest, or that's what he's saying, because there you have to have some sort of context for it, and in a world where there's like such a lack of context in terms of imagery and the way sort of younger consumers particularly consume that imagery, I think it's interesting to see where he stands in that, because I totally agree with you, but then from someone who's not seen the show, you're like,
even when Kane did everything with the Crocs, like even in that is enough to like pique interest and like kind of be like, there's nothing about this which is rebellious, and I can't look at this and think, oh, that handbag, or I can see that dress, or you know, those shoes, they're gonna fly out the store. I don't know.
But there's also something where he's kind of I mean, he's a young guy still, but he's had probably one of the longest careers of anybody working in fashion today. So he's kind of on his like third act, really. Like he's been the young star, and he's kind of been quite isolated, because if you look at his generation, like the John Bartletts and the Todd Oldhams and people that were kind of doing a lot of things he does are, you know, they're doing other things now. They've somewhat retired from this, and he's kind of, so he's been young, he's been this global superstar, he's retrenched to a relatively a reduced mainline offer, and it's kind of, where do you go? You don't need to work. I mean, it's the same as Tom Ford, really. It's, you're not in that moment anymore, so do you think your customers are just going to keep moving with you? It's where you kind of want to take it.
It's where you go next.
Yeah.
That's kind of what's
It's just
interesting.
in light of Bernard, or whatever his name is, saying that he's in the red.
Bernie.
That it's kind of a bit of a, I'm surprised that maybe there's something respectable in not kind of selling out and not jumping through those
Well,
hoops.
he said that when he closed Marc by Marc. He said that, you know, it was so great when he started it, and he felt like he was really making clothes that like women really wanted. And then he said he got to a point, I think he said it, Laura Craig did an interview with him, I think it was like yesterday or something, in the Evening Standard, the quote's in there, and he said it got to a point where he felt like it was just kind of stockists giving him a line sheet of what they needed and wanted, and then he was having to respond to that.
Yeah.
And then obviously they had that sort of great period where there was Katie and Luella such a short amount of time. But I imagine that is a slight concern. It's like how much, when it does become sort of design responding to sort of, you know, we need a navy jump, we need this coat sold well.
But that was interesting, that whole Luella Hillier moment, because that bunny hop stuff like was really trashed when it first came out, and that's one of those collections which aged well, actually. And, like, people still wear, people still talk about, and it's really it's like almost in living memory what Marc by Marc Jacobs is about, and maybe that lacks like a linchpin.
I think it's really interesting that you were both referencing Prada, because I think there is a similarity also, which is one thing that I think has kind of come in quite slowly into fashion. Well, actually, maybe not so, coming quite fast, but what people haven't noticed is, and I think it's slightly the Gucci effect, but it's also kind of Vetements, is a lot of the things that feel very now are totally seasonless. Like, you can't tell the collections apart at all. And actually, the model of this, which I think is more exciting to fashion journalists, because it's like, oh, what are we going to get? What are we going to get? And that excitement before a show, like, what are they going to do this season, which you always get before a Marc Jacobs show. You know, you have no idea what decade he's going to go to or whatever. Same with the Prada show, kind of the same with the Com show as well. That kind of feels slightly out of times with sort of the spirit of the now in fashion, where everyone is just doing consistency. You know, you can't, like with Gucci, like the set changes and the theatre of it all is amazing, but the pieces are totally interchangeable between season and season and season. Whereas with this, it's like you could not put one look of that. If you took a look at that and put it in last season, it would look totally stand out. Whereas Gucci, everything's interchangeable. And Prada do a very similar thing, where it's seasonal. Yeah. And I wonder if there's something about that, going back to what you were saying about Shah, about the consumer, I wonder if there's something about that confuses the consumer, because when everything is image-led, in a way it's clever to do something that kind of continues and is different enough to continue to spark interest, because it means that whatever picture you see at whatever point, whenever someone regrams something, it's still relevant. Whereas with this, it's like, what if you happened upon this on Instagram and then you went to the store and it's totally different?
Exactly.
Whereas with Gucci, it's not seen now by now, but it almost is. Because it's like, if
always that chiffon bow.
Yeah, it's like if you saw that collection and went into the Gucci store, you would get something that felt exactly like that collection. But with Prada, it's the same thing. If you loved the collection they just, like the men's collection they just did and popped up into the store, you'd get a lot of commercial stuff and last season, which looks totally different. So I think that's a...
Actually, I'm just wondering if change of image had effect on Marc Jacobs' identity as a brand. Because there was this moment when they wanted to photograph Miley Cyrus. And Jürgen Teller, who was, you know, created all this identity for Marc Jacobs over the years, he said no. And they still put her, and that kind of...
They started
that was kind of like the end of actually image of Marc Jacobs in a big time. Because I felt like I kind of like used to be very obsessed about Marc Jacobs, and I think because of the ads. Because they always projected this image of a carefree person who is really like not precious about precious things and actually having great time. Just really have. And this advertising felt so fresh and interesting and quirky. And
It felt a bit cooler, I think.
it was much cooler. And I think this advertising that it is now, it looks like a business. It's just business.
Well, the thing is with David Sims, he's an amazing photographer, but he shoots so much advertising in a way that you kind of, it feels like the spirit of the times almost too much, you know, where you're like, you're aware of how many campaigns he's doing, whereas the Jürgen stuff just always felt sort of slightly
Off kilter.
Yeah, slightly different.
It just felt like genuine, some genuine image that there was no art direction to behind, like big machine to say let's shoot it like this.
It's quite affectionate as well. I think that's the thing, is he's quite a warm designer. You get the sense that the clothes are designed to give people pleasure when they wear them, which you don't always get with designers. And I think the advertising used to be like that. It was
Yes, and also like these things that he used to do. I remember what was one on a rider was called shoplifting, and it was a big court case.
Because she stole Marc Jacobs' jumper.
He sent her Marc Jacobs. He said, "Please, darling, be fabulous in court."
Yeah.
And then he put her in advertising.
But he's from this other era, and like all these images look like postcards to his friends. And when he had like Kate Moss in suspenders smoking a cigarette on the catwalk, it's like very much a sense of like Marc and his pals. And like you were saying, they were kind of like rolling through New York and like picking things up as they went. And that crowd is kind of dissipated now.
I think he's a master of pop culture, and I think a lot of that comes from his collaboration with Katie Grand, you know.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is now, I think everyone is more cynical about pop culture, like because of sort of things like Instagram. So actually, you know, using someone like a Miley Cyrus or a Kendall Jenner, obviously she got her break on a Marc Jacobs runway. People kind of eye roll in a way, whereas when he's used people in the past, it's felt kind of delightful and unexpected. So, you know, like Bette Midler or Cher or whoever, there's an element. So it's just, I think that's also been difficult for him, is when he first used these amazing pop culture figures, it felt kind of new and innovative. Whereas I think now, particularly in the fashion press, there is an apathy towards people using celebrities, which is kind of a part of his DNA.
Yeah, he's kind of been ahead of his time forever.
He is. He's one of those people that's punished from being too ahead of, you know, he did it and now it's normal.
The best one was with the Porsche Spice.
Bag.
Because that was amazing, because she was just, nobody used to take her seriously until she had such a bad taste.
Yeah,
and then,
it's
and
one
then
of my favourite adverts ever.
Same. I think it's
his
the
photos
humour.
were so funny.
Yeah,
I think the humour and I think like the sort of
Yeah.
youthful humour and the wryness that was in, you know, like the Jürgen campaigns is maybe potentially missing from, like you say, but maybe that is part of his transition from being that kind
The
of
one
like
with her
young
legs in the
designer.
bag.
Maybe
Yeah,
it's
the one
like
at the start.
growing old.
He's like his new era.
And like that
potentially.
image, I mean, like that's so Instagrammable. And I don't know when did he make that? Like 2011 or something?
Oh, way
No,
before
way,
that.
way.
It's,
2000 something, right?
Like
2008.
6.
No, it's I know that it's like
Six?
spring, summer 2008. Can someone check that? I think I just got that wrong. What
I
season is the
think it
campaign?
was 2008 came up one of the,
Oh,
yes.
Oh,
yeah.
spring, summer 2008.
2008. And like, you know, that now that's an Instagram image, right? He was making
Yeah.
it.
But you know what? Instagram didn't exist back then.
No, not at all.
And actually, like, I don't know, Instagram is a really weird, it's a really
But do you
weird
not think
outlet.
campaigns have got more conservative, even though we've got
Yes,
Instagram now?
100%.
You'd think they'd be more. Like I was looking, like even just around SHOWstudio, like I look at some of Nick's like Dior campaigns, Nick Knight's Dior campaigns, and you're like,
they're amazing.
they're so kind of
individual.
innovative. And there's so many campaigns of like from mid 90s to 2000 that are so amazing. And I wonder what it is. I wonder if there's so much imagery now.
I think the imagery that is really successful now is the imagery that's emulating that. Like I think about Tyrone's Calvin Klein campaign. And that was so.
You mean the current one?
Yeah, I guess it's last season.
The one with
the
the
Mike Calvin's.
Yeah.
with the-
Mike, whatever, Mike.
Yeah, but it's a very cynical. It's a very brilliant branding, but kind of very. I mean, I love rough, but it's just.
Oh no, not the rap one. The one before that, the Mike
okay,
Calvin's
okay.
one. Yeah.
It's like it's kind of very noughties and 90s in its feel, isn't it?
But I also think it just looks like a selfie. You know, taking all the language of social media, like a status update, and
Yeah,
it's kind of
this one-
selfie-esque picture.
There is one there. It's a
Yeah,
selfie
it's very
camera.
clever and it looks like sexy.
Whereas the new one is just incredibly chilly and sort of.
Well, the new one is
Really
back
odd.
to that idea of imagery that looks sort of like a rarefied world, whereas this is about like it looks like your world.
But it's
you know?
not that far from those images that Marc was creating however long ago.
No, totally not.
And those are the ones that still resonate.
And
now-
this is like like the most significant campaign. Like,
Oh, 100%.
you said this, and like, wow, like, I don't know if you think of a Bottega campaign, like I cannot bring one to mind. Not that it's bad, it's just
Like a
not.
recent one.
And like,
the
I would
Balenciaga campaign is amazing.
But I think anyone would know this. Like, you see kids who don't work in fashion. Like, I have friends who don't work in fashion and who know like my Calvins. It's like a thing now. And like to be able to do an ad campaign that changes kind of like, that becomes a catchphrase. It's like, how rare is that? That never happens. It's like,
So rare.
and that's what this has managed to do. And
you've
like Balenciaga, yeah, it's beautiful, but it doesn't exist in the real world in some ways. Whereas this has like had a pop culture effect where people would be like, my Calvin. You know, it's a saying.
people
now.
recreated it on Instagram themselves.
Yeah.
It's
So
better or
exciting to
worse.
think how, in a way, that's a kind of repeat of where Calvin Klein started. With you know, those ads with Brooke Shields. It's like 1,000 years ago, but that was something that everyone was talking about.
Yeah,
Well, that was my
Marc
favourite
as
thing
well.
about the RAF thing, because I was thinking about like the Mike Calvin's thing, and I was like, oh, it's so clever, it's hard for him to follow. And then he did all these jeans and jackets in the men's show, which had Brooke Shields on them, and I was like, Mike Calvin's, ha ha ha.
They
it was
looked
very
good.
clever, like nothing becomes between her and her Calvin's, ha ha ha. And I just thought it was very clever that, but yeah, you're right in terms of like, I think, if you think of the things today, it's like this kind of, you know, amazing, amusing imagery, amazing collaborations, like that is Marc, that is his DNA, and then...
And I think what he did was be high fashion, but the images that he created didn't operate like that. They were like digestible to anyone on the street. They were clothes for anyone on the street, and that's why, you know, brands like Calvin and Supreme are, you know, kind of superseding those big fashion houses that we've always held in kind of high regard, whatever. But they're just more relevant. They're just more real, for want of a better word.
Do you think the problem is for the brands that exist somewhere between kind of pop culture and mass market and luxury? I think luxury brands are kind of fine because there's always been people who wants to buy like an Hermes Birkin bag. But I wonder those brands that sit in that awkward level between luxury and sort of fashion, which is because fashion's now become so much part of pop culture. I think they're really struggling because it's almost like it doesn't feel expensive enough for the money. Do you know what I mean? Like with Marc Jacobs, it's almost like if a Supreme t-shirt feels just as comfortable, yet is like a sixth of the price, why would you go to... I think there's this interesting thing where those brands are in a really tricky position.
I think like Jacquemus and Marquez and lots of these middling brands are probably picking up, you know, a lot of the market and a lot of the consumers' interest.
If you think of Acne, that was such like contemporary, like going in at that level was so clever.
But Marc Jacobs is not Acne.
No.
Because it just doesn't have that kind of intellectual backbone. I think the problem as well is that it's not much, it's a world changed around. And Marc Jacobs was always kind of like a hip brand to wear for really cool, interesting, quirky celebrity at the moment. And just the world changed around just by events like Vêtements. The luxury is being actually redefined right now by other people, and all these other designers, they actually better really watch out, because in the meantime the rug is being taken out of their feet. But at the same time it's a beautiful collection, it's really well done. It's just maybe he doesn't need to be attached to this hip, because it's a question of who ultimately wears it and buys it and seen in it. And I think maybe he relied before a lot on a woman who really wants to feel the momentum, you know, and project that momentum. And maybe this customer just went to, I don't know, to Vêtements or Balenciaga or somewhere else.
If you look at like Karl Lagerfeld, there is life after the zeitgeist. You can just carry on going, and it's almost like Marc is moving towards that.
But he designs Chanel.
No, it's just, but still, I think just in terms of personality, Marc's that same position where he can kind of make statements and talk, cut through a lot of noise to some degree. And I think that's why I'm curious to see where he goes, because you can try and chase hip, or you can try and find a new... I mean, there was a point when Oscar de la Renta presumably was a young, cool designer, and that's not what they're trying to do now. So it's where I'm more interested in where he goes maybe than where he is now, because it does feel like there is a bit of a, am I with the Instagram kids, am I with, you know...
Well, that's the difficult thing. It's like when you are sort of the like enfant terrible, when you're like this amazing sort of rule breaker, there comes a point where you grow up, and then it's like, how do you position yourself? And it's like I always kind of have a soft spot for Marc Jacobs, because I just think of all the innovative, and I also think, like, look at Louis Vuitton now, like Nicolas Gaskier, it's not working, and like he was so amazing at Louis Vuitton. I do think
as near as the excitement.
It just doesn't feel right,
But
you know.
he's changed, you know. I remember, like, I love looking at pictures of him in the 90s and noughties. He was like a bit chubby, and he'd like always come out in like these big white trainers and like a terrible outfit. And now he's like this lean, you know, detoxed, straight edged, Botoxed, openly guy who's like, you know, kind of surviving in a different world, like we're talking about.
Yeah, he used to look like a really kind of sexy math student, or philosophy student, kind of like a very cool by looking totally uncool.
Yeah.
But that's like McQueen as well. You saw that with McQueen. Like, people grow up and they change, and it's just. I think there is this problem that it's like when you become too big and too cool, well, not too big and too cool, but when you become big and cool, it's like. I remember having a conversation with Lotte Volkova about this. So Lotte, who styles Vetements, Balenciaga, and she used to do Gosha. And I kind of asked her, I think we've got the video of it on SHOWstudio, it's in the In Conversation project, but I asked her about, you know, being the cool stylist of the moment, and she was like, I know it's going to end. Yeah. She was like, I know that moment will come. And like, she didn't seem concerned about it, it was just more, but I think like having that awareness that it's like when you are the thing of the moment,
it's always the beginning of the end.
In a way, maybe a slow and steady burn is the better way to go, like in some ways, you know.
Like a Prada, I suppose. Prada is kind of an example of a brand that manages to survive no matter what. It's kind of untouchable. Yeah. Like it's no one can question Prada's cool. No one will. It's kind of this.
Or McQueen, I guess McQueen had like McQueen at Givenchy, and then McQueen now, like it's like obviously under Sarah Burton, it's like very elegant, but it still has that drama and that kind of the eccentricity, but you know, that he brought to it. So I think in that way, potentially him and Marc are sort of contemporaries in that, and he did that very well, obviously.
I think someone who'll probably have a similar trajectory to a Marc Jacobs will be someone like a J.W. Anderson, where it was so kind of the now, of the moment, young designer, now, you know, new establishment or whatever you call it. And I think he'll get to a similar point where it's like, there will probably be rocky roads and ups and downs and what have you, because, you know, he's going to grow up as an older designer, still be a provocateur in the same way Marc Jacobs is, but won't be that new young kid anymore. And I'd be interested to see how that goes. And I think maybe they'll have a similar sort of time of working out how to stay relevant when you're so successful and so innovative in many ways. Because J.W. is a similar kind of thing to Marc, where if you think of all the conversation about androgyny that's happening now and gender bending, what have you, that was something that he really pursued when he started. Same with the kind of, you know, immediate imagery. He did that at Loewe really early. You know, you'd go to the presentation and the imagery would be all over Paris. It's a similar one where it's almost like always a little bit too ahead. So I think it is interesting.
His grinder thing.
Streaming on Grindr, very true.
But I want to say that we're also talking about designer who had huge pressure for the design for one of the massive companies, had his own brand, come out of it not having breakdown or committing suicide, and actually continuing. I think it's a incredible achievement, and it's very lucky. I think he has probably people around him who can support him, and you know.
And I think also in the context of New York, which is not known like London for kind of producing wonderkids, and you know, if you think about the big legacy of New York, the Donnas and the Ralphs and the Calvins, that with the sort of the big institutions, it is so hard to, in fashion, to stay fresh, but in New York to continue to be super creative and a rule breaker. He's kind of he's unique in the firmament of New York designers. So I think that it'll be interesting to see, you know, we're all kind of, I think, thinking ahead to the next season and see where this is going to go, because clearly with his format of bringing the models outside, that's worked for him, and that's kind of an interesting little quirky thing. And I think there's going to be you said 3 acts, and there might be a 4th yet.
Yeah,
Definitely.
You always, I think that's a good note to end on, actually, this idea of like he's very unique, but knowing, clapping and saying we want more. So what's going to come next season? Should we give him a big round of applause? Yes.